Doll customization is not for children. I am using toxic chemicals as well as sharp and hot tools. And I am Susika. Welcome to another episode. Today I am going to work with a stained doll. Here is today's candidate, a Monster High doll called Twyla. She has purple skin and grey arms. I start by cutting her matted hair as close to the scalp as possible. This is how the doll looks without any hair. Next I undress the doll. Her hip joints are very loose. I fix this by adding a drop of super glue to her hip joint, then turning the leg until the glue has fully dried. I also fix her knee joints by adding a drop of super glue and bending the leg until the glue has fully dried. This is very important, or else the glue would make the knee joint immobile. Next, I bring water to a boil, then soak the doll's head in the hot water for 10 minutes. This will soften the vinyl and the glue inside her head. Then I take the head off the neck pack, and with an old screwdriver I scrape the inside of her head to loosen the hair roots and the glue inside. I remove hair roots and glue with needle nose pliers. Next I soak a cotton pad in pure acetone and remove the doll's printed on face. As you can see, I cannot remove the red stain. I will try to hide the stain later. Next, I reroot the doll's scalp. For that I am using synthetic doll hair and a rerooting tool. I push the hair inside the hole, and I do this with all of the holes in the doll's scalp. This process takes many hours, but I always think the result is worth the work. I want to give this doll hair in 3 colors. I am using light purple, light pink and white. So at first I wanted to turn this doll into a clown, but then I accidentally cut the hair too long, and I think all of her beautiful shiny hair doesn't suit a doll clown, and so I am going to turn this doll into a fairy instead. Once I have rerooted the entire scalp, I add glue inside the head to secure the hair roots inside the head. The next day I gently brush the hair, and then I pour boiling hot water over the hair to straighten it. Next I prepare the doll's body with 2 layers of Mr. Super Clear Sealant Spray and add pink pastels to all of her joints to make the skin look more alive. Once I am done shading the body, I seal the pastels in with a layer of sealant spray. Next I want to keep the doll's pattern on her legs, and I add silver acrylic paint to restore the pattern. I then let the paint fully dry, and then I add varnish over the paint so that the paint doesn't chip. Next, once the varnish has dried, I start working on the doll's outfit. This is going to be a flower fairy. First I add a little skirt made of lace to her waist, and I add some ribbon roses. Next I want to give this doll an overskirt out of organza fabric. I want the overskirt to be open in the front. I am using organza trim for this, and I secure the fabric on both sides of her hip with a drop of glue. For her flower overskirt, I am using a piece of felt fabric as a base. I add the fabric to the skirt, and next I cut fabric flowers into pieces and add the petals to the skirt. I try to work as clean as possible. I add the flower petals in layers. I am also using different kinds of fabric flowers in the shades of pink and purple. I add complete fabric flowers to her skirt. As you can see, the flowers are a bit smaller. I also add complete flowers to the back of the skirt. For her top, I am thinking I will add this lace instead of the pearly one. I secure the doll's top and her bust with a bit of glue. Then I am adding more flower blossoms to her skirt. And I also add pearly charms to her skirt. These are little flower charms. I think it's looking very cute. Next I want to make sleeves. For that I cut the trim of a piece of organza and I wrap each piece of fabric around her arm and secure it with a drop of glue. For the fairy's wings, I am going to use a deco butterfly. I add a drop of hot glue to the center of the butterfly and then press the glue against the doll's back until it has fully dried and hardened. Next, I want to cover the stain on the doll's forehead. First, I add 2 layers of Mr. Super Clear UV Cut Flat Sealant Spray, and then I start to add pastels. I am going to make a gradient in purple over the doll's forehead. I am going to use pastels in multiple layers until the red stain isn't visible anymore. So whenever I have added a layer of pastels, I add a layer of sealant spray, let it dry, and then add more pastels. This is a time-consuming process, but I'm really happy with how the gradient turned out in the end. I really can't tell how many layers I have used. It were a lot. I also added pink soft pastels to her cheeks, nose tip and lips. Next I am adding white to her eye area. This is going to be the base for her iris color. I am working with watercolor pencils here. I darken the corners of her mouth and her eyebrows. I draw with a white watercolor pencil. I am using a dark purple watercolor pencil to frame her eyes, to draw her lashes and the eyelid crease. For her pupils I am using a black watercolor pencil. Remember to always add a layer of sealant spray if you want to save your progress or build up more opacity. As you can see, it takes multiple layers to build up opacity, for example on her sclera, or the lip color, also on the eyebrows of course. Here I am adding white highlights to her lip and I keep on working on the corners of her mouth. Her iris will be golden green. The upper part of her iris will be green and the lower part golden. I add the base with watercolor pencils. I use the black watercolor pencil to darken the lash line. I also add white to the middle of her lips. Here I am adding liquid watercolor in gold and metallic green to her iris. I let the paint dry fully, then add a layer of sealant spray. I really like adding metallic watercolor to my doll's irises. I think it looks very magical. I use watercolor pencils because I can easily fix a mistake with a wet brush. Black, however, is difficult to remove. Here I mix white gouaches with water and add catch lights to the doll's eyes with a pin and a nail art tool. With a nail art brush and white gouaches I paint the white eyelashes. I also add some shimmer, this is mica powder, to her skin. And I seal it all in with 2 final layers of Mr. Super Clear sealant. I then reattach the head to the body and decorate her hair. This is the finished doll. I think she turned out lovely. I'm really proud of her face up and her pretty outfit. I braided her hair, added a golden wand with a charm. I named this fairy Layla. I really like her color scheme and her pretty face. This is one of the prettiest dolls I have done this year. She is already sold. Look how long her hair is. It's extra long because I measured it wrongly. As usual, stay safe and be creative.